Just one more hour until reinforcements, aka me, arrive to save the day. But until then, keep your eyes on the highway and keep on trucking with Jimmy Mack on Road Gang Radio, y'all.
She insisted on that. She insisted we play that. She's going to try her best to, I don't know if she's going to be able to do the interviews. Nat Segaloff, by the way, who is now becoming a regular contributor to the show, has, wonderfully volunteered to make some time for us today because we lost one of our guests, Audrey. We're going to get her booked again on the show. The weather is just really wreaking havoc with our friends who are over in Nashville. There will be no We Should Write today. It's going to be a replay. We'll do it that way. We'll figure all that stuff out. Marcus Hummin was supposed to join Lindsay, the celebrated songwriter of Wide Open Spaces, and Cowboy Take Me Away. He and a number of great Broadway musicals is not going to be joining her because he lives in Nashville as well, and people are kind of scrambling to make things happen. And our good friend Robert Braswell, however, the executive director of ATA's Technology and Maintenance Council, is joining us. The Mideast is treating him okay. He's surviving. He's set up for this. Hey, Robert, how you doing?
Oh, doing great. Single digits in the evening, teens during the day. It's not the kind of weather we're used to in the mid-Atlantic, but we get a little bit of everything out our way. So we're really prepared for just about nothing.
We were saying before, it's like we understand all weather systems. We're not capable of dealing with any of them other than the glorious joys of spring. Yeah, I get it. I'm right there with you because in New Orleans, it's like, wait a minute, it's not 70 degrees. What's the problem? What's going on? Whole city shuts down. Robert, you're going to keep people safe, and as you've been doing the last couple of weeks, you've been really helping keep people safe by letting them know, the ins and outs of their truck and how you can kind of keep up with the maintenance and the general maintenance, which is where we're headed today. Welcome back, and tell people what's going on.
Well, yeah, and today we are going to be talking about maintenance concerns that surround a topic on just about every trucking professional's mind today, and that's cold weather operation in a very general sense. With almost the entire continental United States under extreme cold warnings, boy, it's a critical thing to do the right thing when it comes to vehicle maintenance, or you're going to risk being stuck out in the cold. And joining us on the program today is our frequent guest and longtime TMC contributor, Derry Stewart with DWS Fleet Management, who's going to be sharing his insights on what he thinks are the critical points to know when it comes to cold weather operation as it relates to maintenance and repair. Derry is a longtime TMC member. He's one of our most frequent guests on this segment, and he's a TMC Silver Spark Plug. That's the council's highest honor, and we're very pleased he can join us on the program today. But before we get started, Jimmy Mack, we always like to let our listeners know about our week's special offer, and what with the topic being just about everything, we think the TMC PMI manual for technicians is a great offer at the discounted price of just $25 plus shipping and handling. To get it, you can call our customer service line toll free at 1-866-821-3468. Just mention Radio Nemo, get it for that special price. Also, you can email us at tmc@trucking.org, or just visit us over at our website, tmc.trucking.org. Also, if you're an owner operator or small fleet, you got 100 or fewer power units, we'd love to have you as a member of the Technology and Maintenance Council. You can join for the discounted annual dues of just $150, and do that today. You'll get our 2-volume recommended practices manual. That's over 4,000 pages of information like you're going to be hearing about on the program today, and many other great benefits too. So just please call that same toll-free number today if you're interested in signing up. And as always, reminder listeners at the top of the program, any recommended practices we discuss reflect the consensus of our members. We offer them as recommendations only, and everyone must first determine for themselves if they are safe and appropriate for their operation. Please remember that TMC doesn't endorse any product, person, or service, and the opinions expressed on the show are those of the individual and not necessarily the opinion of his or her company, nor TMC, unless stated otherwise. And with all that out of the way this morning, please welcome to the program Derry Stewart, live from Massachusetts. Good morning, Derry.
Good morning, Robert, and it's great to be back on the show again. And certainly the weather is, when we look at the weather in the Northeast and we see it going all across the country, it's an opportunity for people to enhance their maintenance on the vehicles in cold weather. But it's great to be on the show again.
So, you're up there in the Boston, Massachusetts area. They just had a huge 10, 15-year snowstorm up there. That's not necessarily unusual for your part of the country, but for a lot of parts of the country, cold weather operation is kind of an unknown, particularly if you haven't been in the industry for the last 10 years. It seems like these things happen in 10-year cycles. But there's a lot to know about cold weather operation that if you don't necessarily go to all 48 states, and you're just pretty much down south, but all of a sudden you're dealing with single digit temperatures as they are down in the south the last few days. You really got to, be prepared for this. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck. And there's all sorts of things that I know you keep up with. And if you do it right, you don't have to worry about cold weather operation, do you?
Well, that's true, Robert, and certainly being in the Northeast gives you a little bit of advantage. And we're close to Canada and up in Maine, where the cold weather is a lot longer than it is here. But we got pretty smart back in from 1978, the blizzard of '78.
Right.
So we are well prepared. So I got at my house, I got about 20 inches, and it doesn't take long to get back in operation. But when it comes to the vehicles, there's a few basic things that should always be maintained. And the one thing that kind of humors me is when I see that people have what they call winterization programs. If you're running a good program, you don't need to prepare for anything that happens in winter. Now, that's easy to say in the Northeast, but down in the South where they don't experience that type of weather, it can be detrimental if they don't quite understand it. But, there's some very basic things, and we've talked about these on the shows before, and it really comes down to batteries to get the vehicle going, certainly fuel, and certainly keeping the environment for the driver warm, which would constitute thermostats. But when it's 0 degrees out at 60, 70 miles an hour going up and down the highway, it's pretty hard. The engine doesn't create enough heat to keep it warm enough. So there's a lot of activity sometimes with the winter fronts, but they have to be managed as well. But you've got to have strong battery maintenance to get the vehicle running.
Well, let's start talking about batteries first of all, and then we'll move into fuel, because fuel is one of the things you can't always control. It depends where you're at. If you're starting out down south and you're heading up north, you may have to treat that fuel along the way. But let's get the batteries first. They always talk about batteries letting you down in cold weather, but really heat is the enemy of batteries. So the damage you experience in the winter is because of the damage that happened during the summer when the conditions were much warmer, right?
Yeah, that's true. Heat will cut the life of batteries as well as when it is cold, and that shows truly that the batteries are weak. But battery maintenance is not once a year or it's every single PM. And if you understand charging system of vehicles, and I'm sure there's been many tech talks about charging systems, but the batteries really only get to about 70-75% of state of charge when they're new and the truck runs normally, because there's so much draw on the batteries and parasitic load. So battery maintenance there's a couple of things of cleaning the terminals and making sure that they are up to full charge. And that's why there's been supplements of solar panels, because batteries never really get to a full state of charge. And there's so much electronics in the vehicles today, you get below 10 volts, and the truck will give you transmission problems, it'll give you engine problems, and it becomes a problem. So there's nothing more important than batteries. Batteries are more important than oil.
And of course, it's not just the battery, but it's the connections to the battery to the rest of the vehicle. That the vehicle harness, the electrical harness, if it's compromised in any way, you're going to get resistance. That means you're going to get voltage drop. That means you're going to have a hard time cranking those batteries when the time comes to need it cranked.
You'd be quite surprised how many starters are replaced because of weak batteries, low voltage, because low voltage is what kills a starter. And then if you're up in anywhere in the north where there's salt and corrosion, the connections lower the voltage, and people are replacing starters when it's really corrosion and weak batteries. So, for some reason over the last 5 to 7 years, the life of a battery has been shortened. And in my opinion, it's probably primarily from recycled lead. So an area not to be conservative with how you spend monies is batteries. So if you're looking to get the last click of starting a vehicle from batteries, you may want to look at batteries as more a preventive thing. And if you can get to 3 years, consider yourself lucky. The truck has got to start and got to go.
Let me ask you this question. So you're servicing your batteries, you're cleaning your terminals, making sure you have a good connection so you don't have the high resistance. Once you've done all that and they're nice, bright, and shiny, do you put dielectric grease on the terminals and then hook it back up, or do you not do that? There's two schools of thought in that regard.
I personally do not look for any type of grease or sprays or anything on terminals. And although the silicone sprays may have a little protection, I see in fleets, if somebody puts grease on the terminals, technicians do not like to clean terminals and load test them if they have to deal with all the grease around the connections. So I'm not saying that it doesn't assist in preventing some corrosion, but I do know what it does is it prevents good cleaning of the terminals, and technicians want to touch that because nobody likes to mess with batteries.
That's a good point. Let's move on to fuel, because as we said, sometimes you can't always control the fuel that you put in your vehicle. What do you do about preparing your fuel situation so you don't get the gelling, you don't get the filter plugging, particularly if you're going from warmer climates to colder climates and back?
Well, let's talk about the most basic principles of fuel, and that is fuel storage. Now, there's two sides of this. There is your own fuel, which is your own fuel storage, which is not as prevalent today as it was, 20 years ago. And then there's truck stop fuel. So the first thing is the filtration that when it comes out of the ground. Now, the truck stops do a really good job of trying to protect their fuel storage, but they pump so much fuel, it's a non-issue. But if you have your own fleet, you have to have filters on your own pumps, and then you also have to do fuel tank maintenance on your own vehicle, because the real issue is condensation. And when you have ultra low sulfur fuel, it can manufacture condensation, especially if you've got aluminum tanks and you've got hot fuel in cold weather. You will manufacture condensation. And the real issue that happens with that is that it gets on the fuel filters, even if it goes through a fuel heater, but it'll get on the paper, because fuel filter paper is designed to absorb water. And if you have cold weather, it is the condensation and water particles that freeze on the filter paper, essentially shutting the truck down. So it comes down to basic tank maintenance. Now, you may choose to use some additives, or for years I used isopropyl alcohol to absorb the water. And at one point in time, you used to have drains in the bottom of fuel tanks. You could drain the water off. Today, there are not drain plugs on the bottom of fuel tanks. And when a lot of maintenance is done at either dealerships or truck stops, there's a lack of intensity on fuel tank maintenance. So there are tools out there to vacuum the bottom of the fuel tanks and to absorb and take the water out. So fuel tank maintenance, whether it's above ground storage, below ground storage, or on the vehicle, is critical.
So we've got our housekeeping covered. Let's say we're doing everything right about there, but you can't always control the housekeeping when you're going to somebody else's house to get fuel. So what do you do then? Do you treat as you're going on the road, or what's the answer?
Well, certainly my threshold is 0 degrees. Prior to 0 degrees in bad weather, and even in good weather, you should use some form of water absorbent chemicals, whether it's isopropyl alcohol or some additives or some of the products that are on the market. But once you start to get below 0, then you get into a fuel issue. And at some point below 0, you have to blend with kerosene to make sure that the fuel will flow and it dilutes the paraffin wax in it. Everybody calls it fuel gelling, but fuel does not gel until it gets about 20 degrees. So you got to prepare for the condensation, the moisture prior to that. So if it's something that you're buying in a truck stop or your fleet puts it in to absorb the condensation and the moisture, then that's as preventative as you can get, especially when you're buying fuel on the road. Because you can,
go ahead.
but
Go ahead.
it's like a glass of beer in the middle of summer. You have cold beer, you have warm outside temperature, and you have nothing but condensation on the glass. So that's how you got to think about it. It manufactures water.
So you're going to get less energy content out of number one kerosene than you would diesel fuel. So what's the right blend? You know, you don't want to lose too much fuel economy, but then again, you don't want to stop your operation either. What's the right blend of number one to number two?
10%, I use roughly 10% Caro starting at 0 degrees. And for about every 10 degrees below that, another 10% to get to somewhere around 30% if it's severe cold. The rough number is about 1/10 of a mile per gallon for every 10% of fuel of kerosene. So if you're running 20%, you can rest assured it's probably 0.2 of a mile per gallon.
You're listening to Tech Talk with TMC. We have Derry Stewart with DWS Fleet Management. We're talking about cold weather operation and general maintenance issues. We've just been talking about batteries and fuel treatment. Let's move on to a couple other important topics. Winterfronts is one, for example. People have all sorts of theories about winterfronts. Do they work? What kind of winterfront? There are certain designs that are better than others, and TMC has a recommended practice that discusses that.
Yeah, winterfronts, if you're traveling 60 miles down a road and it's 0 degrees, the engine and the horsepowers today, they do not create enough heat. And so to operate the vehicle at the right temperature, obviously when an engine runs warm is where you get the most efficiency out of it. So you've got to have a winterfront not only for driver comfort, but also operating the engine. But you have to be very, very careful. And I would agree, Robert, you could follow the TMC recommended practice on winterfronts, but they do have to allow a certain amount of air to flow through those. So you don't see as many of them today, but the owner operators know how to manage that. But it is an important thing. And for when you run a winterfront, you can also expect to lose about 0.1 of a mile per gallon as well.
And some of the designs actually will cause harm and damage to your cooling system. Often you'll see these diamond holes in the center of the winterfront shield. That's one of the worst designs there is because it leaves hot spots in different parts of the heat exchanger. And you're going to get, poor airflow direction, and it's not really going to do the intended effect. And you're going to shorten the component life of your radiator, your charge air cooler. You really got to be careful about the style. TMC's recommended design is where you have 3 vertical slits in the winterfront material that are all equal size and equally spaced apart. And that gives you good airflow, and it does not give you those hot spots in the heat exchanger. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have a certain amount of air going through the radiator for the air charge cooler. So it has to maintain a certain amount of cooler air going through the engine to obviously operate efficiently. So the ones with the diamonds or pieces of homemade cardboard, you don't want to do that. But
we recommend if it's 40 degrees or more, you take the winterfront off because that's going to be counterproductive too. So only use those below 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, and as a fleet operator, I would suggest even below that. When it gets to 30 or 20 degrees, and kind of the weather we currently have. Right now, I'm sitting in 12 degrees, so 12 degrees at 60 miles an hour down a road. It's going to take a lot of work at the engine to create some heat to keep the driver warm.
Let's stick with the cooling system for a minute. Thermostats is sort of the Rodney Dangerfield of the cooling system. That and the radiator cap. Those are two critical things that you really got to stay on top of to make sure your cooling system's performing optimally. The radiator cap keeps the pressure because they're pressurized systems. And you need to keep that at whatever the specification is. And the thermostat, well, if that doesn't open and close at the right temperature, you may or may not have heat, and the engine may never get the operating temperature. What do you do about that?
Well, certainly a thermostat is critical, and there was a time with engines that you could control thermostats and run 200, 205 degree thermostat, but today that's strictly controlled by the manufacturer for emissions and stuff. But the cap is critical, because if you don't build the pressure, okay, then you do not have the ability to generate heat in the engine. So they're both critical pieces of it. The best way to tell if a thermostat is not operating correctly is the engine runs cool. Most thermostats have a little leak valve in them, so that it will leak and dribble some water through the thermostat and recircle through the engine. So when you're running at 0 degrees, you really never get a chance to get the engine to full operating temperature. So when you're operating with a proper thermostat and a radiator cap, and most people don't realize the importance of a radiator cap, both in the summer and winter. So they're both critical. And as you're operating the vehicle, if you're not getting heat in the cab, then you got a bad thermostat.
Coolant itself is critical. We always talk about coolant a couple times a year on Tech Talk with TMC. I'm not going to go into details about the different kinds. Rest assured, most folks are using a nitrite-free organic acid technology coolant, or whatever color or flavor you have. That's your selection. Bottom line is you want to make sure it's a 50-50 blend, no more than 60-40, because if you get too much alcohol, it's not going to do its job. If you have too much water, it's not going to do its job. It has to be in that sweet spot for it to manage the heat and the freeze protection.
That's absolutely correct. And you can have too much antifreeze within the system, and you don't want to have that. So, but today with the weather temperatures that we currently have around the nation, I guess it's just important to have antifreeze in your engine.
Let's move on to some other stuff that not everybody specs. It depends on what part of the country you're in. But, we're talking about fuel, keeping the fuel so that it flows, treating the fuel. Sometimes that's just not enough, or you want to have a little bit of extra advantage. What about fuel heaters? Some folks use them successfully. Other people say they can get by without it. What do you think?
Well, I visited Canada one time many years ago, and they didn't run any fuel heaters. And that's when I learned how they blend fuel and they run kerosene. But fuel heaters are certainly a combination of fuel heaters, and you can either have an electrical fuel heater or you can have a water-based fuel heater. I particularly like the water-based, engine coolant fuel heaters that are tied into the system. So when the driver calls for heat in the cab, then he's heating the fuel.
Right.
But there are cases you've got to get the fuel to the fuel heater. So in severe cold applications, there are in-tank heaters that are available, so that when the engine starts to run, it's actually heating an in-tank heater. So coming from the tank, the fuel is already warm enough to go through the system. But the enemy, again, is still water. And there are a lot of cases way up in the north in Canada where they run these same fuel heaters in hydraulic tanks. Keep the hydraulic fluid warm as well. So there are options there. You just have to choose what is the best. I've always been a proponent of in-tank heaters in the cold weather. And then when you're down in the south, you may not necessarily think that you need a fuel heater, so to say, but they are filters as well. And if you come north, the detriment of coming north when you're in the south is the southern fuel that you buy does not have the additives or the type of fuel to go into Canada. So you've got to manage it much differently from the south than you do from the north.
We have a couple minutes left. Let's talk about brakes. Can't get away with a cold weather operation without talking about brakes. What about preventing your brake, your pneumatic system from freezing up? Treat it with alcohol. Don't treat it with alcohol. What do you think?
Well, the valve people will tell you don't put any alcohol or water depressants in the airlines, but my belief is that you still got to run. You still got to run it. I'd rather buy a valve occasionally, and I've tested the O-rings and everything by using isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol, anything to absorb water, so that your valves operate. And today with air dryers, the valves are so dry, the air is so clean that it doesn't take much to stick. So I believe in that. That you've got to be able to move it. If not, they drag 8 tires right down to the rims and wreck the tires. So
speaking of dragging tires, sometimes you're sitting overnight. It's been so cold, the linings, the brake linings will freeze to the drums if you have that kind of foundation brake set up. What do you do then?
Well, it's usually a big hammer. If somebody wants to get under it and break the bottom shoe, it's usually the bottom shoe that so to say freezes to the drums. Disc brakes aren't quite as bad because the mounting of where the disc brake is, so it's a little bit different. But I've seen many styles of either providing some form of heat to the trailer, but when the trailers are at a drop yard and the driver hooks up to it, he only has one option, and that's a ball peen hammer, if he can get there. And if they're using backing plates, of which I'm not a proponent of backing plates, you can't get to the shoes to break them anyways. It's a tough situation for a driver.
And for drivers too, make sure you have the right cold weather gear. You have, high energy snacks, sufficient, fluids and things like that for your own person, because you never know if you're going to get stuck out there. Keep a shovel in the cab. Keep those kind of cold weather tools that you might have at home in the cab, so in case you get stuck, you can manage that situation. There's so much more to talk about. We don't have time to get through it, so we're in the final seconds here. But thank you so much, Derry. We hope to have you back on the program again real soon. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jimmy Mack there in the studios in New Orleans.
Hey, Robert, thank you so much. And we can't keep repeating this kind of information enough. It is information so worth having, particularly your encouraging people to make sure that they are completely set. And so much of this is about maintenance and is about getting ahead. It's about really kind of staying on top of that pre-trip and really staying on top of things and anticipating rather than just reacting. Well done. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And next week, we're going to be talking about the forecast for future truck designs with Paul Benning on Tech Talk with TMC.